Hi there and welcome to English Hacked. This is an attempt to give you something worthwhile about The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga. My aim here was not to give just a dry chapter-by-chapter summary that just kills the book, but provide you with a framework of my arguments and my take of the book to help you write essays, engage with the novel more richly, and to generate your own ideas. Off the record, I think this is actually one of the better novels the IEB has selected in quite a while. Seriously, I'm not just saying this. For the most part, you always have to praise and glorify and treat the novel you have as one of the best things you've ever seen. You have to show how the complexity of character, plot, conflict all come together to elevate certain key ideas. Doing this actually hasn't been easy, I don't think, for some of the novels over the past 10 years. But for this novel, I believe you don't have to pretend to praise it. And I really hope that you can go into your examination with some conviction. You can bring this into your essays and that you can have a strong investment in the character Balram, and that all he represents about poverty, corruption, and the reality of developing nations is something that crosses over into how you look at South Africa. All the issues raised in the novel, although set in modern India, we actually see in our country. These are forces that are acting on Balram, from being born in a poor rural area, moving to a city, dealing with that tradition versus the modern life, dealing with the after effects of colonialism, which are simply replaced by new forms of exploitation, struggling for escape and freedom, and turning into something who is just as stunted, just as deformed as everything that actually produced him. These are the things that we actually see around us all the time. Just read today's or any day's headlines. I don't say this lightly. Go and read the novel, right? It is accessible, it's gripping or chilling, if depending on how you look at it, it's relevant, and actually engaging with it is the best chance you have of elevating your essays. Here I give you a framework which will be done through a set of questions that you can use to engage with the novel and refresh your knowledge. So the first challenge, the first big question you have to respond to is, how do you judge Balram? I've hinted at many of the key issues in the novel, but what you really need to focus on is just this question of how you judge Balram. You're almost guaranteed to get a question based on character in your examination if you look at the past couple of IEB examination questions. And in this novel, the job is actually quite easy because it's dominated by one character. He's the unreliable narrator. He's the main protagonist. A little bit more complicated are the series of names that he's given, which show his transformations. So know that he starts with Muna. His family name him as Boy. From his rural existence, he's very insignificant and unimportant. Then his teacher has to name him Balram, which is also a sidekick position, right? To put him on the official registry of the country. So he's so unimportant, he's almost forgotten. Then he's given White Tiger, and that's hugely significant. We'll talk more about that. And then Ashok Sharma is the name he gives himself as the CEO of his company. And it is very cheeky because he's literally taking the name. It's arrogant. He's taking the name of the master that he murders. So that is the most important job you have. Defending your judgment of Balram Halwai. Almost forgot to mention the surname Halwai, right? So that means sweet maker, and it designates Balram as firstly a Hindu, and he's also of a low caste in the social system historically constructed in India. So he's from a rural area, it's extreme poverty, he's in a lower caste, all the odds are against him, and the word you want to use in your essays is he's just incredibly marginalized. Okay, so the question this leads me on to is, would you actually want to be friends with or a business partner with Balram Halwai after reading this account in this novel? And my answer to that is, I would rather actually live with a black mamba, right? If you consider this closer, the man is dangerous. For much of the second half of the novel, he actually becomes almost delusional. He betrays his fellow driver in the beginning, Ram Prasad, and he ousts him as being a Muslim and gets him fired. He murders his employer. That's the biggest conflict of the novel. He murders Ashok, who he even sometimes admires and identifies with. And he does this. This is the real sticking point. He does this knowing that his whole family is going to be killed off, probably because of his actions. He then starts up a car riding service and becomes an entrepreneur, but he does this through very corrupt and amoral means. and he even then covers up for his driver who ends up killing a boy on a bicycle, and it seems like this happens regularly in his business. Then he also begins to unravel and hallucinate. Water buffaloes speak to him, skulls and speak to him as beheaded members of his family. His personality almost effectively splits. So no, not a reliable friend, not the type of person you would really ideally want as a business partner. I don't think we could ring the South African bell any harder here. As a side note, for me, this is like our taxi industry as one small example, where the big players, and as you rise up in the big players, there's so much blood on everyone's hands, and it's a necessary service, absolutely vital, but it's become very corrupt in the way that it operates. All of this kind of shows us, right, that Balram is a character who transforms into becoming someone who's more and more self-interested no matter what the cost. He ends up becoming a monster. He's actually the next version of a cruel master who replaces the colonists, who replaces the landlords, right, who have made his life hell. And he ends up contributing to the suffering caused by the very system that he is trying to escape. So some great adjectives you can use to capture his character and prove the following words like delusional, duplicitous, power-hungry, arrogant, internally conflicted, unstable, unhinged, manipulative, obsessed with his own exceptionalism, don't forget that, isolated from others, very isolated, and he's, I would say, racked by insecurity that we can see and that he doesn't admit to. In other words, Balram sees his own journey as a success, as becoming an entrepreneur, when in fact he becomes what I would define as a predatory capitalist. His journey is in fact a tragic fall into a life narrowly defined by self-interest, insecurity, and it is one where he is a danger to those around him and to the whole of society. Some questions I challenge you to think about here are: how great is Balram's success? Does he live a lonely life? And does he attain freedom? And what does his success actually look like? And this is the crux of the novel. This is the secret to its success, is that in spite of all this disapproving judgment of what is ultimately a vile, immoral character, a monster of a character, the pulse and impact of the novel is carried by the fact that we as readers still, simultaneously at the same time, against our very ethical will, we also pity and admire Balram. That's the genius of the novel, right? So what do I mean? I mean here that Balram can be described as an anti-hero. He lacks conventional heroic qualities, particularly because of his more and more twisted morality. But we end up sympathizing with him when we learn of his immense struggles, of how he has to live, of his upbringing, of where he comes from, of his circumstances, or as he describes it, that rooster coop metaphor, which is critical and will be brought up in almost every essay, in which he is forced to live, right? And this endless suffering and humiliation that he has to endure creates our pity. We also admire him against our will for his self-deprecating humor, very clever character and wit, his persistence, right, to endure against all odds. I mean, seriously, how many of us would have just simply given up, right? That's the white tiger exceptionalism, and really for just immense potential and brilliance as a human. He's observant and he's industrious, and we also have sympathy for him being a perpetual outsider. The more I think of Balram, the more I'm just filled with such deep pity for just that loss of human potential, of all that he could have, all that he would have become. So there's an essay question lurking in the idea of the anti-hero here. So to be more specific, he meets many of the criteria. So firstly, right, he's an outsider / misfit. You can see this from the beginning of the novel, and you can even read that fear of a lizard as being a reminder of how he just doesn't fit in, right? His class bullies and kind of teases him. He doesn't tell us so much of that directly, but it's there. Even the drivers later on, he shuns being part of them and he looks down on them. So he makes himself into an outsider. That's always there in his personality. Typical anti-hero. He's also, I would argue, doomed to fail, right? The second point of the anti-hero, if you want to see this. He doesn't see this, but we see it. His journey to success and riches. It's a failure because he becomes someone who's carrying out the oppression, who's furthering the poverty in his own country, the corruption and the systems of the government that are meant to support people. He's part of bringing that all down, right? He's actually a failure in my books. Third point here, is his fall as a character serves as a critique of the circumstances and the society that produces him, right? That's also a typical anti-hero characteristic, and it criticizes India, right? The new modern India. He can also be seen as a hero from one point of view, the fourth point, and as a villain from another, if you want to argue that. And a typical anti-hero also has a focus on their personal motives, and they are very self-interested. They put themselves before others, and that is just classic Balram. Hopefully you have enough to refresh your knowledge and understanding and maybe add to some of your arguments around the novel. There is one last final big picture comment that you can apply to the novel, and I know I've missed out lots, but I feel like this is a big chunk of it, which is you can read the novel as symbolically using Balram to represent a vision for the future of developing countries, the countries which are emerging from the bitter struggle of cyclical exploitation. Balram is in this way a model of a new kind of entrepreneur for the future of the world, where he comes from a jungle or a Hobbesian, right, kind of world, where the world loses its structures of law and order and protection and becomes a kind of a jungle, right, as Balram describes it at the end of the novel. And all these animal names make sense that way, right? It's a vicious world that we are now living in. Everyone is at the same time also very hungry for Western individualism and exceptionalism. We become kind of callous and ruthless and amoral, and we're unstoppable that way. And in this vision, the alignment of these countries also swings more towards China. You can see this in the way Balram is convinced that the premier coming from China is the one who's going to understand him and see what he's doing. And he also rejects the superficial and soft humanism of the West. And we can see this in the way Ashok is presented as coming back from America compared to his more hardened brother, the mongoose. Balram dismisses and does not see any kind of soft humanism as being valued, and he sees it as being, in the end, superficial.